see dead people. I was so afraid to even go to the cemetery. Actually, whenever I heard that there was somebody dead in the area, that day you'll never sleep.
My 21-year-old son was shot and killed on Father's Day while I'm waiting for them to come visit.
Born and raised in Bukavu. And Bukavu, for those who know the history of Congo, of Zaire, it's the place where like most of the rebellions, the troubles, the war usually start. And so we have seen war. I grew up, I was so afraid to see dead people. I was so afraid to even go to the cemetery. Actually, whenever I heard that there was somebody dead in the area, that day you'll never sleep. I grew up in that moment whereby now you are getting used to seeing dead people. But mostly the thing that really turned my life upside up is the day that I experienced violence in my presence. I was the only person who was there with my father, and he was killed in my presence. So just imagine you being a teenager, you're looking at your father as a role model. This is like the strongest person in the world, and you see him crumble before you, and you are the only person there, and you can't do nothing. Like it really took something out of me. In fact, from that time, I rarely cry when I go to mourning ceremonies, because to me, it's just like smoke. Yeah, so even the meaning of life changed from that point.
Well, the second I got the phone call from my dad's phone number, and I picked up the phone and it wasn't my dad's voice, like you said, like instantly a switch went off. And when he said he was a doctor and my dad was in critical condition, all the walls started closing in. Like I got like tunnel vision, like nothing made sense anymore. And they called back a few hours later, said, "Oh my God, Mr. Kim, we're devastated to tell you that your father was attacked, and we have footage of the attack." So I was already in such a mental, like just dark, bleak space that to hear that was just another level of, I had no idea the situation could possibly have gotten any worse. And it just became like 100 times worse because it wasn't an accident. It was a crime. It's clear as cut as day that there was somebody out there who did this to my father, and he's not, nobody knows who he is, where he is.
When I was 6, I was making a nature documentary on cassette tape with my turtle, my pet turtle. I was all of a sudden surrounded by our neighborhood teens. There were a bunch of poor white kids who didn't have any other outlet. We lived in a really poor town. We were one of the few folks of color in our community back at the time. They told me that if I didn't do what they wanted, they would kill my turtle. I just was terrified for my turtle, mostly, than for myself. They had their hands on my underwear, and I didn't know what they wanted. I was confused, I was scared, and I don't remember much of what happened after. When you're a kid and you have strangers violating you for no reason, it's confusing.
I said, I've been incarcerated for 16 years or so. In 2001, on Father's Day, I'm sitting waiting for my children to come visit me. I had a son who was 21 years old at the time and 3 daughters. And I talked to my son that morning, hey, Dad, we're coming to visit you for Father's Day, blah, blah, blah. And, being incarcerated and getting a visit from your children is it's the greatest feeling ever. So you sit there, you're on pins and needles, you're waiting for them, I'm waiting. And it's 10 o'clock in the morning when I talk to them. Then 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock come and no visits. I'm wondering what's going on. I get on the phone, I start making phone calls and find my son and, and my daughters to see what's going on. So I couldn't catch anybody. I couldn't even catch my own mother. So I called my ex-mother-in-law. I said, hey, Mom, how you doing? This is Ronnie. She said, hey, Ronnie. I said, where are the kids? They're supposed to come visit me. Have you heard from them? She said, you haven't heard? I said, heard what? She said, little Ronnie has been shot and killed. My 21-year-old son was shot and killed on Father's Day while I'm waiting for them to come visit.
Connu sous le nom de Santos. Je suis né ici au Rwanda, au district de Gasabo, dans le secteur de Chimurua. Je suis le rescapé du génocide. Nous avions un groupe qui s'appelait Indienzi, donc le groupe des jeunes rescapés du génocide. Nous avons assis ensemble et discuté qu'est-ce que nous pouvons donner comme notre contribution de construire notre pays, de construire la paix durable dans le pays. Nous avons constaté que même si nous sommes victimes de ce qui s'est passé ici au Rwanda, mais nous avons le devoir, nous avons la responsabilité d'aller voir les gens qui sont dans les prisons, les gens qui ont commis les crimes et discuter avec eux.
would have wanted, first of all, I would have wanted a hug. Ain't nobody hug me after any of this shit happened, you know? If I had a time machine, I would go back in time and hug my little self. Be like, it's okay, it's not your fault. That's what I wanted the most. Like, in the immediate aftermath, somebody I trusted and loved to tell me that it was okay and it was not my fault. The most. I think that would have been the most helpful. And then after that, a system of care that would have centered me and asked me what I needed, right? Rather than assuming that it knows the best for me. They don't assume that what a survivor wants is prison for the person that harmed them. That's affordable for poor folks. The measure of affordability is determined by us and not by the system. Because, what do they know about what I can afford? An equitable system is one that takes everybody's story into account.
Bien sûr, si quelqu'un a fait de mal, on peut le punir, mais pas seulement la punition. Donc, ma façon de voir les choses, c'est on doit se concentrer plus sur la correction plus que la punition. Moi, je crois que nos gouvernements, ici en Afrique ou dans le monde entier, doivent se concentrer sur la façon à corriger les personnes au lieu de se concentrer de les punir. Pour moi, je crois que la justice, donc nous devons impliquer plus la correction des gens qui ont fait le mal plus que la punition. C'est ça ma façon de voir la justice sur les personnes.
And I forgave the child that killed my son. And I advocated for him to be treated as a juvenile and go through the juvenile system where he could get the help and assistance that he would not get in the adult system. Prison is something I don't wish on my worst enemy. I told you, the years I spent it, I saw the depravity that goes on in prison, and I would not want to expose a child to our prison system. And like I say, by that time, my thought process had changed. I put more value in the lives of human and, in humanity, so to speak. And so it was just a natural fit for me to advocate for the child to be treated as such. My ex-wife and my son's mother, she didn't like it at first. She would have no part of it at first. But through our discussions on, over numerous visits, she came to the same conclusion that, it might be more beneficial to the community and to our family and his family that we forgave the child, because, sending him to prison was not going to bring our son back. It was not going to do anything but harm the community, further harm his family, and further erode what I figured the family of society, the fabric of society. So it was, some agreed, some didn't, but in the end, everybody was on board. The young man that killed my son was my son's girlfriend's younger brother at the time. And so about a month and a half after my son died, his son was born. His girlfriend had his son. So the guy that killed my son is my grandson's uncle. I kept contact with him. I would write him letters and remind him of his responsibility of the second chance that he had gotten. And I'm still in touch with him off and on since he's been out. Because I call it my first contribution to restorative justice. Restorative justice is the concept of healing harms on both sides of the fence, of the offender and of the victim. And me being the family member of a victim, I figured that I could help heal this harm by giving this young man a second chance.
Looking back, I don't know if the police would have believed me, Group of white kids, little Asian kid, who are you gonna believe? When violence is so close to feelings around intimacy and relationships with other people, it just kind of burrows deep emotional lines about what you think is right or appropriate or okay. And so it made me vulnerable to future acts of violence. I was thinking of ways that I could tap into the anger and the rage, because I knew that if I tried to manage it, or squirrel it away, it was just gonna grow and destroy me. A lot of what's available to survivors is tailored to white women. A lot of the public narrative about who a survivor is white women. And when you're not a white woman, you think that I don't get to be a survivor. I don't get to access these resources. They're not for me. When a system is tailored around one particular group, it leaves the rest of us out.
That day, I went outside to protect my brother. But I didn't know I was actually hurting another one. Three months into the program is where you basically would get into this thing called a restorative justice circle, where you meet the person that you had this big traumatic ordeal with, and you sit around and you talk about what happened that day and also what you could do to fix it. We're told that we can bring support people. I automatically asked for my mother and my aunt to come. I waited for it to start. I looked them up and down repeatedly. I looked for every reason to say I wanted to leave that room. We started having that conversation about what happened that day. I feel like I'm a person who's very connected to feeling. So like I automatically start looking at my mother's face and I start looking at my aunt's face. Cause I'm trying to get a feel of, are we still in that open place? Or did we just go to that armored place? Like, we ready to get down to this room, I guess. My aunt is one of those women that's like, men need to cry, men need to let things out, we wouldn't be killing each other, right? That's her main slogan. So I seen her and her head starts moving like this, in agreement while my brother's crying. And I didn't feel that urge to jump over. I didn't feel that urge to act out my anger that was in that day. I felt myself choked up. I pulled it back. I looked him in his eye and I said, I'm sorry. I looked at his mother and I said, I'm sorry. I looked at my mother and I said, I'm sorry. I gave his mother a hug. She gave me a hug. She surprised me because at the end she kissed me on the cheek. It was weird, but it felt good. And I stayed in that. I know that I am connected to so much with every action that I make in every day. And that's what made me see that I was worth needing healing.
In between the time that my dad was attacked and the time we did the restorative justice session, we had a daughter. And I could tell that, raising a daughter or raising any kid, like, you have to be completely in the moment and completely just there for them. And I was still carrying around all this just hatred and anger. I felt myself like just not being fully present in the moment. And I felt like there was this compartmentalized part of my brain that was trying to handle the rage and revenge and justice while I was, in front of this absolutely joyous new living being that knew nothing of these things. Another thing was that my dad, his whole life, he was a teacher. He taught for 50 years. And the main thing he taught was justice. He taught political science and philosophy. Was justice and harmony and how to get along with people and, you know, how to build better societies. And that was probably the final piece of the puzzle for me to say what my father wanted. And he clearly would have wanted, you know, this kind of resolution as opposed to, you know, just dragging it out in court like any other, like a typical case. When I started learning more things about him from Assistant DA Daphne Yoran, and from the detectives as well that were in charge of the case, I shifted more towards more from anger towards Mr. Lee to maybe sorrow. He had a really tough life. He working different jobs since he was 13. He was very, you know, did not have money. His mother and his father passed away, and they were his like main caretakers. He had trouble like kind of just taking care of himself. Mainly though, even though he was working a full-time job, he had medical conditions. He was diagnosed with cancer and he had trouble paying his medical bills. And one thing led to another. He became late on rent a few times and he ended up with something like 51 cents in the bank.
He couldn't keep his job because he was out of work for his medical treatments. Right. And so he had to go to a part-time position. And once we got all these details, it became very clear that he, you know, the context in which this crime took place, you know, he didn't wake up that morning and say, I want to murder Professor Kim. You know, he was trying to rob him and pushed him very hard, yes, but it just seemed like he was a victim of society and that it wasn't like a premeditated thing. So that just made me feel a lot of empathy towards him and his situation. There
were no weapons involved. He apparently didn't even know that my father was that badly hurt and actually died. He didn't know that until he was arrested. It made it, easier to understand what was going to happen. We could have walked out of the room anytime we wanted to. We could have canceled anytime we wanted to.
Also, you were very, very angry, but you had a transformation when you found out the details of Matthew Lee's life and the circumstances under which the assault took place. And it just became more difficult to see him as a one-sided monster. It was more like, this is a human being who, you know, we don't want to make another victim in this case, you know, of sending him to prison for 25 years or longer. So having the reduced sentence as part of the restorative justice process. So it was that we met with him, but also he had a reduced sentence as a result of participating in the meeting. So that was also important to us and to me, especially because I am aware of the conditions of prisons, and that didn't sit well with me, knowing that he could be there for 25 years.
I mean, going back to the whole, idea of a senseless crime, like, I don't think there's no such thing. Like, it made sense in a way because Matthew Lee had to choose between feeding himself and paying for his cancer treatment and paying rent. That's why it happened, and that's a whole other conversation for why this is still a problem in one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
The victims and the offenders usually from, like I said, the same neighborhoods, and they all know each other. And, you know, our whole criminal justice system would look differently if we actually talked to the victims and find out what they wanted. You know, what often happens is the prosecutor decides what they want to happen and then drag the victim along with them to make sure that happens. And the victims don't usually get heard or they don't get considered very much. And it's a lopsided system. And that's why I love the restorative justice model so well, because it takes into consideration everybody. Because usually the person that committed the crime, he was the victim, or they were a victim at some point in their lives. You know, we have this thing that said hurt people hurt people. So the people who usually commit the crimes or do the harm have been harmed at some point in their lives themselves, and no one ever gave any, you know, attention to the harms that they suffered.
Sexual violence is really a big issue because in our society today, it is the women who are really taking care of the entire family. We usually say that it's the men who are the breadwinner. What I'm used to seeing is that it's the women who are really winning the bread nowadays. The many years of war in Eastern Congo has made that men have fled. And you even go into villages where you find it's just women and the children. Some of the children are born out of rape, which is an issue. Now, just imagine now a society which has really lost like all the tissues or the foundations of a really good family. If we don't deal with it, there are so many consequences.
Dans notre projet, nous avons approche des prisonniers de différentes façons. La première façon, c'est d'aller dans la prison, discuter avec les prisons. Nous allons dans la prison avec le groupe déjà qui n'est pas prisonnier, qui ne sont pas prisonniers. Et nous rencontrer dans la prison avec un groupe de prisonniers. Nous avons un sujet. Nous débattons, nous formons des groupes dans la prison et nous discutons sur les différents sujets avec l'objectif de construire la paix durable dans la société. Nous faisons quelque chose comme l'intégration de ces prisonniers dans la société. Donc, les approches avec ces prisonniers pour leur dire que même si ils ont été dans la prison, ils ont été corrigés, ils sont les êtres humains, donc ils doivent être confortables dans la société, donc se sentir comme toute autre personne, pas comme ils se sentent comme ils sont toujours criminels, considérés comme des criminels, de les approcher pour discuter avec eux comment nous pouvons construire un monde, le meilleur monde, le monde de paix, le monde qui n'a pas de crime. Donc c'est cette réseau qui me pousse de continuer à approcher les prisonniers pour discuter ensemble la façon que nous pouvons arrêter les crimes, arrêter les conflits, donc vivre dans le monde qui a la paix. tu n'as pas entré dans la prison. Comme tout le monde, tu crois que les prisonniers sont tous des mauvaises personnes. Les personnes qui ne peuvent contribuer aucune chose à construire la paix. Mais après avoir assis avec les prisonniers et discuté et écouté leurs pensées, leur vouloir de construire, leur repentance, moi, j'ai été guéri.
I think that the current way that the court system operates actually also dehumanizes the victim, because we would not have had any voice in anything that happened at all. And not if we had followed the traditional route and not have had the opportunity to meet Mr. Lee, then the only time we would have seen him was when we were sitting in the courtroom on the day of his sentencing, and just see the back of his head. We might not even see his face.
And his lawyer would do all the talking for him.
And the lawyers would talk to each other. And after we had gone through the restorative justice process, we sat in court and we had that experience. And we realized that if that had been our only experience, we would have had no resolution in our hearts to what had happened. Like, the act of meeting him was extremely powerful in terms of allowing us to heal and move forward from this event. And this, what he did was extremely personal to us, and it changed our entire lives forever and the history of our family. And it's to have never been able to actually look him in the face, and like the power of him saying, I'm sorry, and like seeing you all here crying, and this is going to stay with me for the rest of my life. He said, he understood how what he had done affected us forever, and he felt the weight of that. And to be in the same room with him, coming to understand that, it helped a lot with healing.
One way to frame it is that anger and grief are entirely different things. They overlap a lot. At first, I was equally angry and grief-stricken, but I had a choice to let go of the anger. But anger, I think my father would agree, anger is a part of hate, and like grief is a part of love. Like, the grief is not necessarily something you want to let go immediately. It's not something you want to get rid of. I eventually said I forgave Matthew Lee during the sentencing, or not during the restorative justice session. And even saying to him that I forgave him helped me, it helped me like finally release that anger. I had to even look up the definition of what forgiveness means, because I was debating, am I going to forgive him during the sentencing? I don't know. What does it even mean to forgive someone? It means that you are no longer angry at somebody for a mistake that they made. It's not saying it's not important what happened. It's not saying, let's just forget about what happened. It's just specifically, you decide to let go of the anger you have towards a person. And that's what we did. It did not take away the grief at all, but it just took away this anger that was still hovering over us.
I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter, and we have programs whereby we work with the women in the healing process. Like, it's one of the therapy. We have also music, like dance therapy. And so with the women, we make song. Actually, it's the women who come up with their own songs while they're just discussing between themselves, putting out their pain, like going through whatever, so they get to understand that they are not the only ones who've experienced that, but also they come up with their solutions. Ufisadi pia njaa, magonjwa nayo njaa, mito yake yatiririka damu ya ukabila, mayatima wanalia njaa yawamaliza, mbona mama wauliza. The song I did is called Nzala. If I destroy this tree and I don't plant another one, tomorrow I'm going to pay the consequences of that. You see, so it has really to be everybody has to be involved. The world, we are all of us in one boat. And if we don't get aware that this one boat, if it doesn't work in America, all of us will perish because we're in the same boat. Yeah, so that's the message behind that song. Jiko halijawaka, tuamke, tukomeshe njaa, tutelemae, tusili sanzala.